today is the Leapfrog Summer. And what that means is we're changing how this summer is going to operate because there's so much change in the marketplace. And I've got really three goals today. One is to convince you that these next 78 days are the most essential for your child's future. Now, many of you already believe that. That's why you're here. You've been a part of these conversations before. But I'm also today, I'm going to really inspire you to change. I'm going to try to get you to shift what you're thinking and to actually engage in a way that's different. And then the last one, you know, these webinars are about learning, but I want you as a parent to make a decision today to engage in a progressive learning path. That means you are learning how to lead your child every week as a progressive idea that this happens and this goes on for months and years from now. So these are my three goals today. Okay, we did the pre-survey. We went through it. Now, here's the question I'm going to put for you. It's on the right of your screen there. What is the one universal truth for high-performing athletes, writers, musicians, students, any professional? What is the one universal truth that they all share? And I'm going to ask someone to unmute and give me their best guess on that answer.
I would say practice. Practice.
Thank you. And I didn't see who said that, but obviously somebody who's been a part of this conversation before. Maybe not. Yes, so thank you for that. Yes, it's practice. It is that there is no off season, right? In fact, I just had a conversation last night, a text with a friend of mine. I think his wife may be on the call, but he is a Olympic gold medalist, two-time or maybe three-time Olympic gold medalist. And I asked him the question. I said, listen, you know, in the off season, what happens? What do you do? And his answer was, well, I practice. Not the same level of intensity because one can't maintain that level of intensity who's a track runner, but he practices all the time. Michael Phelps, do you realize for, I think it was 7 straight years, he didn't miss a single day of practice, not when he was sick, not not during Christmas, not New Year's. You know, so his commitment to excellence was habitual, and that is what made him a household name. The same is true with almost every student I have ever talked to that has, particularly the students that have come from really tough spots and have grown to be incredible students. Every summer, every day, they're doing some learning, and it's the parent that is driving the majority of that. So practice, here it is. It's daily. It's progressive. It's long-term in nature. It's not just like we're gonna really grind it out for this 1 week or 1 month. And then the most important part of this is that there's a certain level of effort that's required. Just like my buddy talked about when he was training to be an Olympian, the effort shifted depending on where he was. That needs to happen too with your kids. So let's talk through that last point. Now, this next slide is slide I put together based on some research around learning. But we all kind of understand this intuitively, and I'll explain this and then you will understand it intuitively. This is talking about the amount of effort and the amount of challenge that a person needs to improve. So on the left, you see high effort, low effort. The red bars on the top, it's the frustration zone when you are having you're pushed so high or so hard that you cannot maintain attention. You get frustrated and want to quit. The bottom one is the boredom zone where you're just not pushed enough and you want to quit. Now, we all know this is happening with our kids in a variety of subjects. But let's now talk through what generally happens over the course of a year in every subject. You've got an arrow here, and this is the kid who is not challenged. He's kind of running flat. He's not improving. He's just kind of sliding along. And guess what happens over time? He will move into the boredom zone. And then after he gets to boredom, he will start to get sick of whatever subject that is, and he will start to disengage. This happens in businesses. We see this because I've done a lot of consulting in businesses, in nonprofits. We see this in governmental agencies. This is where a lot of government employees actually are. They're just straight bored and they disengage as a result. Here's the next one. This is gonna, again, I consider myself, one of my blog posts talks about how this black father became an Asian mother, meaning I actually became really, really focused on driving my kids And I pushed them so hard sometimes that they ended up getting to this frustration zone. That frustration zone is really dangerous because now you create a child who will only do work because they're threatened by it, or only do work when it's externally, so there's an external pressure on that. These kids will quit as well. They will disengage and they will learn to hate whatever subject it is you're pushing them on, whether it's football, basketball, any subject where you get to this frustration zone, the child will quit, just like you will. Anybody play golf? Okay, if you play golf, there is no sport that gets you quicker to this frustration zone than golf. And therefore, we have to be really careful. What we want to do with our kids is make sure that they are progressing like this arrow on the graph now. It's got to be a parent or somebody paying attention, close attention enough to know if the child's getting bored, and then to accelerate the challenge. And if they're starting to move towards frustration, to back off a bit, and you continue this process ongoing. Now, ideally, this happens in school. It unfortunately rarely does. That's not a fault of the teacher. It's a fault of the realities that one teacher, 30 kids, it's impossible to know where every child is at any given point in time. So as a parent, this idea of focus means we are going to narrow our focus on one or two areas and make sure that we're paying attention to this, because we can actually influence this ideal challenge, particularly as it relates to summer. As you do that, as you focus, whether it's reading or math or piano, whatever it might be, you start to see this curve happening. And again, some of you who have been a part of these conversations before have seen this. You see a child that slowly improves to the point where they're now rapidly improving, and then you have to increase the level of challenge, and then they slowly improve again. And this kind of constant progression is what leads to true mastery. All right? This is also what leads to internal motivation, because once a child starts to realize, yes, there's a period of challenge and difficulty, but it starts to mature into something that is enjoyable and I can see progress, the child starts to realize they can learn and they become a learner themselves. That is what we're after. But, and here's the big but. Here again, just to summarize this, the Leapfrog Summer is about this idea of constant learning, the Goldilocks challenge, keeping right in that band of the appropriate challenge, never too much, never too little. But what actually happens is very, very different. So let me cue up a screen share, because I'm going to show you what actually happens in real life. Great. Okay, so this is the kind of the progression of your child. 3rd grade, 4th grade, 5th grade, 6th grade, etc. And then you've got these yellow summer breaks in there. Ideally, when your child is in 3rd grade, they enter 3rd grade at a 3rd grade reading level. Now we know that, oh my goodness, so many times this is not the case, but we're going to just accept this as what we're going to use right now. So they enter 3rd grade at a 3rd grade reading level, right? At the end of 3rd grade, we want them to be on a 4th grade reading level. That is the goal of that year of education. And then of course, 5th grade, etc. What really happens though is this. The child starts in 3rd grade, again at a 3rd grade reading level. If all things go great, that child is going to be at a 4th grade reading level at the end of 3rd grade, right? But over the summer, this is what's called the summer learning loss or summer brain drain. You guys have heard about this? Just give me a nod if you have. Okay, some have not. But over the summer, you have 90 days. And over those 90 days, that child will forget somewhere around 30% of what they've learned over the previous year. It's particularly important in things like math, where it's a cumulative subject. So then the next year, they start 4th grade, a little bit behind, and then they progress. And let's assume again that they'll learn 1 year's worth of reading in this case, and they'll end 4th grade further behind in math, and then they'll drop it off again. You follow this? So to the point where they reach the end of their 6th grade, but guess what? They're not at a 7th grade reading level. They're at a 6th grade reading level. And that's if things go well. And in most schools, They don't. That child is dropping off or maybe running flat over the course of multiple years. This, however, is what the leapfrog summer looks like. We're back to this third grade, and all we're going to do this summer, we're going to just keep practicing going, right? We're just going to keep practice. We're not going to drive at 110 miles an hour. You know, we're not going to go hard, but we're absolutely going to continue learning. That is what's going to happen this summer. And that difference between what might have happened and what actually happened is actually pretty substantial. That gray bar now is the difference between the leapfrog summer and not. Here again, the next summer, we're going to do the same thing. The gap broadens. The next summer, same thing, gap broadens. And guess what, y'all? Your child now is outpacing not only the kids whose parents don't do things over the summer, but they're outpacing the actual academic progression of school. Because look at this. They finished 6th grade, but they're now at an 8th grade reading level. This is what happens in almost every family whose children excel. This progression. And the difference between this is monumental. I will also add, by doing this, it doesn't matter as much where your child goes to school, because as the parent starts to go, okay, I'm going to drive reading, or I'm going to drive math, if you have a bad teacher, which bad teachers exist, y'all, right? They're out there, and if you have a bad teacher, this is insulation from the negative dynamics that can happen with a bad teacher. So this is what Leapfrog Summer is all about. Does that make sense? Let me pause for any questions on that, because this is a #1 issue for right now. Any questions? Okay, seeing none, we're gonna move on. This should shock I almost cursed there, excuse me, y'all. This should shock the stew out of you. How's that? That's me not cursing. This is the calendar for 2000, January 2020 to December 2020. Every yellow date is a day where your child did not go to school. Now, do you see how many yellow days are in this calendar? Now, that star, June 6th, is where we are. That star is, well, let me give you some numbers here. There's 208 days left in 2020. 78 days are summer days. 53 days are weekends and holidays. And so from between now and the end of school year, 63% of your child's days will be spent out of school. 37% will be spent in school. Now, I ask the question, if you want to be an elite athlete, if you want to be a great musician, if you want to be a great writer, if you want to be great at anything, are you really going to slow roll those 131 days, or are you going to make sure you're doing something every day on that, in that schedule? Now we'll get to the resistance, right? We know that kids are going to say, I don't want to do it. We'll get to that in a moment, but this is the key issue. So I'm hoping that everyone listening to this right now comes away saying, all right, I have to really rethink what summer and what these 131 days are going to look like over the next several months. I am praying that that's where y'all are, but it gets worse. If you thought that was the good news, it gets worse. Here is what's in question right now. We have no idea what's going to happen at the start of school. I actually have my own, I'm gambling right now that school is going to be just as disrupted this year as it was last. That we're going to see spikes in coronavirus, and schools are going to need to pull back and send kids home. They're going to have to adjust. So as I talked about this idea of the leapfrog summer being an insulation to having a bad teacher or a series of bad teachers, it is also insulation from this kind of disruption. So once your child realizes, and once you guys have an agreement between you and your child about what's going to happen at home, at any moment when school says, hey, we can't do this, that's no big deal. You just pivot and you're back to teaching and back to requiring your child do academics at home as they did every summer. You guys hearing me? Okay, I'm seeing some nods. Good. So I want you to appreciate just how important this screen is, because if this continues to have this disruption, the burden for education will continue to fall on the parent. I believe that's a good thing, but we'll have more time to talk about that another time. That's where we are. 131 days between now and the end of 2020. I'm sorry, 208 days between now and the end of 2020. 63% of them are going to be days when your child is not in school. So we've got to use this time. And we also have to recognize that it all depends on your child and your family situation. If you've got 4 kids at home, that's a very different burden than if you've got 1. If you're in a 2-parent home, very different burden than if you're in a single home. If you're somebody travels, right? There's all these variables. So I'm going to try to keep things as neutral as possible and invite you to engage with me one-on-one to talk about your specific situations. Now, Rocketry. I want to give a metaphor for how I want you to think about how you engage your child depending on their age and their kind of stage of development. And here is the metaphor. This is a picture of myself and my family when we visited Blue Origin, which is the space exploration company, like SpaceX. You may have heard of SpaceX. Blue Origin is the one that Jeff Bezos, the founder of Amazon, is funding. And that white guy there, his name is Nick. It's a friend of ours. He led us on a backstage tour of Blue Origin. It was absolutely amazing. But this is also Nick. He's an astronaut. That's a picture on the right of him in space. If you can see the close-up, you can actually see his face doing a spacewalk. Now, Nick and I had many times to talk when we visited last summer, but one of the things that he talked to me about was 2-stage rocketry. There are no rockets that can make it to orbit on 1 stage. It's always a 2-stage. The first stage is liftoff and responsible for getting the vehicle up. The second one is where the first stage detaches, and the second stage gets to orbit on its own. This is the metaphor for our kids. Some of you all have seen this before, this graph. On the left side is how the parent has high control when the child is young, but that control shifts to having very little control as the child matures into middle school years. The first stage of the rocket is what happens in these first 13 years, more or less. So if you have children in this phase, you are in a much more of a control and command kind of role, in my view. That's how I assume this, right? And if your child is later on, that means you're much more in the supportive role, trying to get the child to accelerate on their own without your pushing. That is the trick. So the first stage is preparing the child in the basics, getting them up, right? The second stage is getting the child to help the child find meaning, because once the child finds meaning, then they are going to motivate themselves to pursue it. That's the trick. Does that make sense? All right, let's talk about stage 1. I'm going to open up to questions in a little bit. Stage 1, again, this roughly 0 to age 13, it's about low negotiation. Yes, you need to negotiate with your child about how do you get them to do things, but it's a lot less negotiation because you control more. Negotiate about reading and math, but also require reading math. Communications, whatever it may be. I would argue that this is the priority. You start with reading. That is the priority. Move to math, move to communications, and we can talk about some of those ideas around each of those. But we've got to realize that we're going to have resistance. And I'm going to ask you to complete another quick survey because I want to understand what resistance might look like in your family. Kids saying, I don't want to do things, right? Please go ahead and complete this really, really quickly. So I want to understand how much resistance you expect from your child if you're going to ask them to read or ask them to do math. Great. Ending the poll. Sharing the results. Boy, it's an even split. So we've got some who know their children are going to resist, some who are kind of not sure, and some whose children like to read. That requires an individual conversation with each one of these groups because the strategies differ depending on where the child is on that spectrum. But we can talk about it in the QA. Get your questions ready. On math, a lot of resistance to math. Okay, and in the QA, I'll tell you about a summer that my daughter and I had. We call it the summer of what did I call it? The summer of tears. The summer of tears, because we took on math directly.
I thought it was the summer of pain.
Pain, actually pain and tears. It was pain on my side, tears on hers, and vice versa. But yeah, I guess we talked about that, huh, Julie? All right, so let me go ahead and stop this. And that gives me a better sense of where you guys are. So let's talk about how we deal with resistance. All righty. Okay, for reading, my belief, my strong belief, is before anything happens, the expectation of the parent has to change, has to shift, has to really be improved or increased. That's actually, by the way, one of the main points I tried to make in this last week's blog post. Now I want to reverse things. I want to switch things up about this idea of reading. I want to ask the question: what if you did not? And we're going to use a different. Example here. What if you did not have any expectations for your child brushing their teeth? I want someone to tell me, what would that look like? Unmute and talk to me about what would it look like if you had zero expectations about your child brushing their teeth.
Their teeth would rot.
Okay, keep going. So yes, that would be the result. But what would be the things that, if you had no expectations, what would be the daily practices that you would or would not do?
I wouldn't remind them to brush their teeth.
Right.
I wouldn't check to see if they brush their teeth.
Yep. What else?
They wouldn't brush their teeth.
You wouldn't brush it for them? Is that what you said?
Yeah, and they wouldn't brush their teeth.
Yep. What about this? And you've got younger kids. Would you buy a toothbrush?
I mean, maybe if I walked by it at the drugstore, but
if you had no expectations, you probably wouldn't spend the money on the toothbrush.
Yeah.
Probably wouldn't take them to the dentist. When you smell their breath, you probably wouldn't say anything, right? These are the behaviors that would message that I got no expectations about brushing our teeth. But we know what happens when we don't brush teeth. So therefore, we set very firm expectations. Hey, son, come on in. Let me check, right? Even if son says he brushed his teeth, come on in. I still got to check you. And if he didn't, what do? We send him right back down the hall, and we do it again. And if he doesn't do it the next time, guess what? We check and we send him back. That is what it means to have parental expectations at a really high level. And I know parents who, regarding this reading thing, they have gotten into such a tussle, kind of similar to this idea of the summer of pain and tears, where they actually said, when you're done reading, son, you can come and have dinner, right? Or come on and sit down at the dinner table and read to us, and when you're done, then you can have your food. It's gotten to that level of sincerity, because for some parents, this idea of reading is a life or death dynamic. And I think it actually is much more serious than we tend to make it out to believe. The child who, as in the quote by Mark Twain, a person who is unable to read a person who doesn't read has no advantage over a person who is unable to read. So our expectations about reading should mimic our expectations around brushing teeth, around dessert, around bathing. We would never allow our children to go unbathed, every day or every other day if we had expectations around this. Is this making sense? I want to drive this piece home, because if we can shift our mindset to say, yes, reading is no different than brushing teeth, then that causes us to behave very differently. That causes us to say, you know what, son, hey, I love you, but you got to go back and brush your teeth, or you got to go back and read, or come on down to dinner. Here's your book. Read it. Here's this first page, and then we'll get to dinner, right? That is the expectation. So the parents' expectations drive child behavior. Change your expectations and the child will adjust is my dominant theory. And remember this issue right here. This is where we as parents really screw up. And we talked about this before. We might bring the child in and say, hey, it's, read this book and then you can have dinner. But the book is at a very high level and the child struggles to read it. So he's hitting that frustration zone and he's wanting to disengage, but we keep pressing him. That is bad management. That is exactly what I did when I pushed my daughter beyond the frustration zone over that summer of tears. Now I make jokes about it, but it was a mistake. It was something that if I could go back, I would do far differently. And you know what I would do differently? I would have us do some every day, but not push it to the point of frustration zone. As an example, if you want your child to read, come on down, here's a book. It's going to be a simple book, a book that is below his or her reading level. Read me the first page, and let's say it takes 2 minutes to read that first page. Read me the first page, and then you can have dinner. 2-minute read of something that's below a child's reading level is not a hard lift. Does that make sense? So I want to make sure that we are in that ideal challenge zone. We're not pushing the child too hard, particularly early. If anything, we're going to err on the side of the lower challenge until we start to get a habit of this deal set up. All right. So that is for stage one, this idea where the child is young and the mom or the dad is actually trying to press this child forward. That is the general philosophy of how to do this. There's some specifics around, having the book at dinner. But the key issue is the mindset change in the parent, that it creates an expectation that this is going to happen. By the way, to the degree that that parent can align with other parents that have similar viewpoints and can get to this idea at the same level, whether that be a spouse, a grandparent, a neighbor, a friend of your child, so that you're talking to a friend of your child's friend's parent, if I can talk to my child's friend's parent and say, this is what we're doing, and they can agree to do the same, now we've got some alignment and some support for pushing our children, and the children will have fewer reasons and fewer ability to really resist. All right. Let me keep going because we're almost done with the presentation, and then write your questions down and then we can go through them. All right. Okay. So that is for stage one, the younger kids. It is a expectation shift on the part of the parent. For stage two, this is very different. This is helping a child find meaning. I'm not going to bother with the survey because we don't have time, but the survey is really asking this question of, do you think your child has found meaning or purpose or something that motivates them more than play? And again, that's a very hard place for a lot of teens to be, but they're capable of it, and we'll talk about how we get there. Here is the quote that I want us all to really, really reflect on as it relates to our child. And I'm going to read it verbatim because it's that important. When a person can't find a deep sense of meaning, they will distract themselves with pleasure. Now, I want you to imagine that when you look at your 14-year-old or your 17-year-old, or as I've talked to some parents who have 23-year-olds who are on the couch playing video games until 2 in the morning. I've talked to parents, and it's not unusual, unfortunately. That is a circumstance where the child has not found meaning. So therefore, as the author Viktor Frankl talks about, that is what they're doing. They're just looking for pleasure because they've not found anything that has inspired them. By the way, this Man's Search for Meaning is a book that Viktor Frankl wrote, which is incredible read. I would really, really encourage you to read that. But this is where our kids are, y'all. The minute, the minute a video game captures their heart and imagination, it's now an issue of how can I get more pleasure? How can I have more fun? And it's an ignoring of all the dynamics in this world that require leadership. Their leadership required them in 10 years or 20 years or 30 years when they are out of the house and in the world to fight for justice or improvement or to take on some difficult issue. Now, I will tell you, our expectations for our kids, particularly our teenagers, are unbelievably low. 200 years ago, a 15-year-old girl would have a child, maybe two. A 16-year-old boy would have a homestead, would know how to handle everything on the farm, every tool, every instrument, everything needed to run a farm. He would know it, and he would be given so much responsibility. Now, however, we give our kids that much responsibility when they have the capacity to do so much more. So here's how we help our children find meaning. And it's hard. Again, this is that stage 2 dynamic, right? Oh, let me pause for a moment and talk about this transition. This transition between stage 1 and stage 2 is difficult. Not because the child, well, partly because the child is unready or unwilling sometimes to step into leadership and step into their adulthood, but sometimes also we as parents, we want to keep commanding and controlling. And again, I can speak to my own failings around this with my oldest, who I kept trying to control. Now only at 17 have I started to switch this, and I'm starting to see some progress, really as a result of these webinars. I've been coached by you to change how I approach with my kids, and I'm actually seeing progress with my 17-year-old. So I thank you for that. This is not just a one-way dynamic. All right, left side, low negotiation, right side, high negotiation. You've got to have a conversation with the child about what they're interested in. And here is how you find meaning for a child or help a child find meaning. And I talk about it being offense, and I talk about it being defense. We're going to start with defense. You might remember some that were here last week, but almost every call we have, there's somebody that talks about screens and video games as a constant disruption to the learning progress of a child. People, we've got to recognize that screens and video games are probably our number one battle. They are so compelling. They release dopamine in our brain that is just so enjoyable that it's hard to defend against, honestly. So the things that I would recommend on that, you can't find meaning if you're so engrossed in pleasure, right? That's what I'm trying to get at here. So you got to push back and defend the screen situation. How do you do that? What I call a technology fast. Once, twice, 3 times a week, zero technology for the entire day. Now, I want to ask you parents, would you be able to do that? Are you setting an example that your child realizes I can live life without technology? If the answer is no, meaning parents, you're struggling with your own habits and kind of connectivity with screens, whether it's your cell phone or television or YouTube, whatever it may be, you need to look at yourself first, because they're watching you, and if you can't put the cell phone down at the dinner table, do not expect them to do the same. So a tech fast is, there's actually no technology, no radio. I mean, maybe you can have lights, right? But no TV, no YouTube, no cell phone for an entire day. And what you'll find is your child will start finding other things to do that they enjoy, but it also creates space for what we'll do on offense. There's also, you should also Google or go to YouTube and search for dopamine detox. There's some great videos that talk about how important it is for our brains to get off of these screens and to get back into the real world at times. And because of the idea that dopamine, we get almost saturated with it. Now, the next one, though, is sleeplessness. For these older kids, and really for all kids, we have to appreciate that most kids are operating at a sleep deficit all of the time. All the time. They don't even know what it means to be well rested because they're always sleep deprived. So my point to you parents, particularly as they age into this stage two space where we're trying to get them to take more ownership of their life, my recommendation for you is that you not facilitate their sleeplessness. What do I mean by that? I mean that if you give your child a tablet and you have no rules about how and when that tablet is used, don't be surprised if at 2 in the morning that child is on the tablet or playing a video game or on their cell phone in their room while you're asleep. Do not be a bit surprised. In fact, it will happen. So how do you stop facilitating that? You create some rules. And those rules your kids are going to fight against, but if this is important, this is one of the places that you dig your heels in. You don't have to even get angry about it because this is your house. They're living in your home. You're paying for their cell phone. You're paying for all the computer. You can create limits around their use. Here's what we did. We said, because I kept seeing my son bleary-eyed in the morning, disengaging, really like struggling with just his own sense of, oh, and thanks for the folks that are sending chats around. That's good stuff. So keep it up. Thank you. We said, okay, son, I'm not going to put rules on when you go to bed. You're 17. You can decide that. But I am going to not facilitate you staying up until 2 in the morning. Therefore, at 9 p.m., yes, 9 p.m., all technology goes off. If you want to read a book, great, no problem. Enjoy yourself. If you want to draw, go for it, right? But you will not be on a YouTube, a video game, cell phone, tablet, any technology. And guess what happened? He didn't want to do it. Guess what happened? I show up at 9:15, he's on his computer, right? So what did I then do? I said, look, I'm not letting up on this deal. My expectation is that you go to bed whenever you want, but I'm not going to facilitate it. So then I started to bring the heat on this one. This is, again, I dug my heels in, just like I would dig my heels in if my child said, I don't want to brush my teeth, right? I don't want to eat what you make. I want to eat candy. I'm going to dig my heels in because I'm thinking about his long-term future. So what I did was I did two things. One, I bought a timer. It is I'll send you a link. It's a timer you can program that turns something on and off at certain times. And so I said, look, Ben, if you're not able to do this on your own, if you don't have the maturity to or to set an alarm, and when the alarm rings at 9 p.m., you turn off all your equipment, then I'm going to do it for you, and I'm going to add this. I can't remember the term for it, but it's again this tool that shuts off our internet at 9 p.m. and it comes back on again at 5 a.m. when I get up and I start needing to have access to it. So that was the last straw I was going to get to. He eventually got to the point where he was doing it himself. But that tool cost, I think it was $15 or $20 on Amazon. And to prevent my son from destroying his brain and destroying opportunities, I was willing to take that risk and to drive and to fight him on that one because it was important enough. Does that make sense? Super, 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 super important deal. And what I've seen is he has become a different person. He's reading a lot more. He's going to sleep earlier. He's waking up earlier. He's less bleary-eyed. He's more relational. All these things that we had hoped for, and it was because he was not sleeping enough. All right, I'm preaching, y'all. Let me get back to the presentation. We're almost done. All right, now on offense, if you assume your child is capable, your 13-year-old, your 15-year-old, your 17-year-old is capable, like they were capable 200 years ago, capable of owning all sorts of responsibilities and having deep, complicated thoughts, then start to challenge them on it. Here's what I recommend: that you become the classroom that your child craves, that you facilitate learning that stretches him, the same learning that he will not get in school. As an example, right now, deeply unpack George Floyd. Unpack that from every angle. What is it like to be a police officer? What is it like to be a black man? What happened in that circumstance? What's the criminal justice system about? What's likely to happen to these officers? Unpack it. Challenge your 13 or 17-year-old son or daughter to wrestle with these weighty questions, because you'll find that they actually have opinions and they actually can figure out what works and what makes sense for them. Watch documentaries like 13th, which again is about criminal justice, or Food Inc., or go to Dennis Prager, which is a conservative blogger and writer and radio host, and look at some of his work and talk about it and wrestle with it. Or go to, if you learn about economics or actually politics, right? Do a good bad on Donald Trump. Do a good bad on Joe Biden. Do a good bad on any politician. Start to challenge your child to step into adulthood. That is how you start to get this child to start to realize, oh my gosh, there's more out there than this video game. There's some things that I'm actually really interested about. I'm starting to understand the world in a way that I can't understand because of these standardized tests. I almost cursed again, y'all, because these standardized tests in school don't ever get to this level of conversation. Rich Dad, Poor Dad. Go to Google and look up Rich Dad, Poor Dad. You'll find a ton of information about finance. Go to watch TED Talks. These are the things that when your child starts to disengage from technology that is just about enjoyment and play, replace it with this stuff. And what you will find is what I found with my kids. There's a depth to them that I didn't appreciate at age 13. Probably at age 10, y'all. I mean, this can go deep. And then start asking them this question at the bottom. What would you do? What would you say to Joe Biden? What would you say? What would you do or say to Dennis Prager? Does that make sense? These conversations are absolutely essential to help your child learn that they can have meaning in their life. Then the last thing on this offense side is you got to get coaching for you, y'all. These are helpful, but there's so many one-on-one conversations I've had with several of y'all that really change the dynamic because I need to understand much more of the details of what's going on with y'all. But you need, and your child needs coaching. I'm starting actually to experiment with coaching kids that are boys, particularly that are 13 and up, over YouTube and just talking with them about what they're interested in and kind of relaying that back to their parents. That's something I can experiment with if you've got older kids. You can find a lot of this stuff online. You can also talk with me and have a one-on-one conversation with me. But here's the caution. The educational establishment will not help you with this stuff because the educational establishment doesn't know how to do it. You have to learn how to step in and be the school or the classroom that your child's school and classroom just cannot be. All right, lastly, you know what, let me pause here and let's go ahead and do some quick Q&A. Whew, well, I was preaching, y'all. I hope some of this got through. Go ahead and start sending me some questions or unmute and just ask me a question. I'll start taking a look at some of the chats. I see a live chat going back and forth. So go ahead, who's up?
Sorry, did you want us to ask questions in the chat or out loud?
No. Just unmute and ask them to me directly, and then we'll go from there.
I was wondering if you had specific suggestions for offense and finding meaning with, younger kids, because we can control a lot, but then as I'm trying to train, my 9 and 8 year old toward that full time.
Yeah. So that's something that Scott Van Beck, who is a coach and friend of mine, who really encourages me to do that. And I wish I could go back with my kids and do more of what you're asking. I don't know how to do it very well, honestly, Julie. I don't. But I do know that your kids at age 9, at age 8, at age 5, 10, kids are capable of handling much more than we give them credit for. Now, the George Floyd dynamic, I would encourage no parent to show that imagery to any child, under probably 15. But can you talk about, can you watch a documentary like Food Inc.? I think a 10-year-old could probably do that. And that's just about for those that may not know, that's about the mechanization of our food industry. Really controversial and challenging. But I think some of that, Julie, is really exposing them to things through TED Talks, through curated videos that then you can unpack with them. Does that help?
Yeah, I think, it's interesting. We took them to a protest and the 5-year-old was the most into it. And the 8 and 9-year-old were like, we're bored. Can we go home? So I thought that was interesting. Yeah. They are still talking about chess, which they played with you last week. So I'm like, maybe I need to get a chessboard.
Well, so part of this is, and again, I credit Scott for this. Our job as parents is partly to watch our kids to see what they are good at, what they're interested in, and then kind of keep driving into that space. Now, again, compare this with a typical school. you got to force all kids to be interested in the same thing because you got one teacher and 30 kids. But if you know that a couple of your kids are interested in chess, yes, maybe that is a vehicle to start to expand their life and expand their exploration of discovery. So yeah, I would start to go deep on chess because now you can start having chess competitions. You can go to different parts of town, play different chess games. There's something there, right? But this idea of constantly discovering what your children are interested in and then building on that is really, really difficult, but it requires intentionality, and it really starts to uncover who God made them to be. And then our job is to make that happen, not necessarily what we want our child to be, right? I hope that was helpful. Others unmute and give me a question. Anybody else? I thought I saw that Natalie, who's a very masculine looking Natalie, I thought unmuted. Is that?
Yeah, that's my daughter. I cannot change the name now. So a couple of things.
Yeah.
So you said about the screen time. We are not big on TV here, and I'm on the front of the laptop because I'm a photographer. I'm always looking at pictures and editing. So any recommendations about,
Yeah.
what to do with that?
And sorry, when I talk about screens, I'm exclusively talking about screens for consumption.
Entertainment.
I use the word consumption, right? So screens that are really just about me. What you're talking about, you have a screen that's open because you're producing something. And again, I don't challenge my kids when they want to use a screen to build or to learn. I want to learn how to write better. I want to learn about X, Y, or Z. I'm okay with that. It's a question of if it's for production or consumption. And if it's consumption, I'm very, very opposed to it. And it sounds like you might be as well. Does that help?
Yes.
Yeah. I will add one other thing. I don't know the ages of your children, but photography is a fantastic way to open your child's eyes. What I've done, I've got a real, telephoto lens, and sometimes I'll just take pictures of people around town, and I'll show it to the kids and say, "What do you think this person's life is like?" Taking a picture of homeless people, right, and saying, "Gosh, how do you suppose they got there?" Right? There's another place where you can start to expose kids in a controlled and safe environment, right? And start to let them know that this world is more complicated and potentially more difficult. So excellent. I'd love to see some of your photography at some point. Cool. Any other questions?
I have one. So we've started a little bit of a reading habit with my daughter who's going into second. What are your suggestions around math, which seems less straightforward, and there seems to be some thoughts around worksheets versus project learning, and if you were to do project learning in math, do you have any resources?
Yeah, so a lot of this depends on your own space, how much time you have available. So for those that have limited time, I recommend online math programs. And there's one in particular that I recommend called ALEKS, A-L-E-K-S. It's ideally for third grade and up, but if your child reads well, it could be a second grade. And so that's one of the ones that I found to be really helpful in teaching the basics really, really, really well. In fact, my son, I think I've shared this with some of y'all, after one summer, he ended up skipping his next grade of math because he just progressed so quickly over that summer that he knew all the content or much of the content next year. So that's, if you don't have a lot of time, that's an automated way that your child can do the work. Your job will be to make sure that the child does it. You don't have to stand over their shoulder. If you have more time, then there's other programs that I would encourage you to look into. One is called The Art of Problem Solving. It is not cheap, but all things that are valuable cost. And this is one that is incredibly valuable. It is by far the most challenging, and I don't even know how to describe it. I mean, it's a completely different way of learning math. It's all about expecting that child is going to have to wrestle with a problem for an extended period of time before they can answer it, versus what most math is like, here's your formula, plug it in, crank it out. Okay, let's learn the next formula, plug it in, crank it out. This is one that's completely different. So I would encourage you to take a look at the art of problem solving. They have math stuff from early on until late. In a blog or two posts ago, I talked about Kumon. I don't think any parent needs to pay for Kumon. I think you can find all that online for free at a place like Khan Academy. So it kind of depends on your circumstances, and it's certain we can talk again. I think we have a call scheduled, maybe not. But if you want to schedule another call, we can sit and talk about the pros and cons of each. But again, for us, math has been one of these things that we had high expectations on it, and so we drove sometimes too hard. But my my 17-year-old was really 3 grades ahead in math, so he's going to be taking Calc 3 this next year as a senior in high school. My youngest daughter, who should be in 8th grade, is taking Algebra 2 right now. I mean, math is one of these things, you just continue on it and your children can just absolutely crush it. But again, being careful about making the mistake I made about turning it into kind of a god of itself, where you're just, all that matters is math progression. But yes. So
Alex again.
I'm sorry.
Can you spell Alex again? That first thing you mentioned.
ALEKS.
Okay.
.com. And I think it's like 16 or 18 bucks a month. You can buy a year-long subscription or 6-month subscription, things like that, and the price goes down. But in the summer, man, I again, if your child is between the age of 3 and really high school, your job as a parent is to make sure the child does it. Just like you do when your child brushes their teeth, right? Hey, did you brush your teeth? If not, go back and do it, and then we'll have dinner. That is the beauty of online learning. All right. Let me do one more question, then I'll start to wrap it up. Anybody else?
It seemed like people had a couple questions in the chat about video games.
Let's take a look. So yes, so some folks are putting some good book ideas in here. Do you think it's healthy? What do you think is a healthy amount of video games for leisure? Should it all be ruled out, or should it be ruled out altogether? The questions like that. These are things that you're going to have to explore. What I would recommend is that you keep a tight rein on video games, because they can explode so quickly in the child's mind. And there are so many kids that's all they do. This is their social time. This is their family time. That's all they do. And so to the degree you start to give your child freedom to explore that, there's a chance of them dropping off of the cliff, like so many kids, and that just consumes their time. So for us, we don't have a TV in the house for this reason, because it makes it easier to say, hey, you can't watch TV because we don't have one. But we do have YouTube, right? So it's harder to police that. I think a healthy amount of video games is a small amount, but you as the parent are going to have to play close watch on making sure it doesn't become a real problem. Because here's the other thing. Once it becomes a problem, think of it like a drug, right? Think of it like alcohol, right? Once it becomes a problem, it's too late. So the best thing is to monitor it early and to maintain really tight controls until you have a good confidence that your child can manage themselves, and then start to give them more freedom. But that's a really hard one. So good question. Oh yes, someone's saying that their 6-year-old has become addicted. Yep. So yes, it's very, very common. It's extraordinarily dangerous. All right, so let me go ahead and close up. There's a couple things I want to ask you to do. Now I'm not going to ask you. I'm going to tell you to do, because I just gave you like an hour of my time for free. So I feel like I can tell you some things. So first off, I want you to sign up for my blog. Go to theeducationgame.com/blog and just put your name in there as somebody that wants to watch my updates and things like that, because I'm going to be talking about a lot of things, some of which we'll cover here, others will cover in more detail on the blog. I also want you to schedule a one-on-one with me. There are so many circumstances that are just unique to your individual situation. Again, you can go to my website at theeducationgame.com/contact, and there's a free 45-minute one-on-one conversation that I'm giving out for free. And I find it to be extraordinarily valuable because, again, your individual circumstance shifts how I answer some of these questions. Stage one, this is the other thing I'm going to demand from you, is that you have a completely new set of expectations for this summer. Pick one area, reading, math, piano, whatever. Pick one area and make that a new expectation. And then on this larger stage two piece about searching for meaning, really lean into this idea of challenging your child, whether they be 8 or 12 or 15, challenging them with conversations that you wonder if they're not ready for. What you'll find is almost always they are, and they have opinions. Your job is to try to bring that out, because they will not get that in school. They will not talk about finance in school. They will not talk about George Floyd in any detail in school. They will not talk about politics in school. They will not talk about economics and economic philosophy in any significant way in school. These are the things that are actually more important for your child's future, in my view, than any standardized test. So it's your job to figure out how to do that, and I'm here to help. So that is our time. We're 10 minutes over, but I hope this was helpful. My name is Matt Barnes. This is The Education Game.
Thank you.
Look forward to connecting in the future, okay? I wish you guys the very best, and I'll be praying for you and your kids. Take care.